What if I told you that everything you've believed so far about lavish dinners at vast 19th century aristocratic estates is a beautiful but complete fabrication? Forget those cozy scenes from period films. Behind the glittering facade of exquisite dishes, crystal glasses, and impeccable social etiquette lay a completely different and at times frightening reality of food distribution. While the mansion's owners upstairs leisurely enjoyed endless courses of dozens of delicacies, the damp cellars were governed by the strictest rules of consumption and a veritable struggle for calories. Food was not merely fuel for hard labor, it was a ruthless social marker. And most strikingly, this rigid hierarchy operated even among the very people who created these culinary masterpieces with their own hands every day. The butler ate one thing, while the dishwasher ate something completely different. In today's video, we'll head down to a Victorian-era kitchen to show you the real Hunger Games of the 19th century. Spoiler alert, the way they divided up the food will turn your perception of life as a servant upside down. Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because that's where the main paradox of this episode lies. You'll learn about the humiliating system used to distribute the master's leftovers from the previous day among the servants, and why the head cook, the person who literally held all the keys to the pantries, was the very last to receive her portion. I promise, the answer will simply shock you. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the strict division of food within a single large, wealthy household. The spacious kitchens of Victorian mansions processed enormous quantities of fresh vegetables, expensive meats, and exotic fruits every day. However, this culinary splendor was intended exclusively for the estate's owners and their high-ranking, distinguished guests. The inhabitants of the lower floors, who ensured the smooth operation of this system, ate quite differently and followed different rules. Their diet consisted of simple, filling, and very inexpensive ingredients, radically different from the luxurious menu of the masters. The servants' lives were governed by strict rules, under which every gram of rations issued was meticulously accounted for by the head housekeeper. Pantries containing expensive overseas spices, sugar, and tea were always locked with massive, heavy keys. Access to these shelves was restricted to a select circle of the most trusted members of the senior management staff. Ordinary maids and footmen had to make do with meager rations, which were distributed strictly on schedule once a week. Any attempt to take food without permission was severely punished by immediate dismissal without a letter of recommendation. The daily diet of the workforce consisted mainly of thick soups, bland porridge, and vast quantities of cheap bread. Potatoes were considered the main lifeline for the stomachs of those who worked 14 hours a day. They were boiled in large portions, baked or mashed into a hearty puree with a drop of inexpensive cooking fat added. Meat rarely appeared on the lower-level workers' tables and consisted of the cheapest trimmings or sinewy cuts. Often these were tough pieces that required hours of slow stewing to achieve even minimal tenderness. The sumptuous dishes coming down from the dining hall never reached the plates of ordinary workers in their original form. Uneaten, expensive delicacies or pieces of good fish were carefully collected onto completely separate, clean plates. These items were sent to the private quarters of the senior staff, bypassing the long communal table in the mess hall. The rank and file received only empty broth or bones, from which secondary liquid soups were later prepared. In this way, social distance was maintained even through the distribution of ordinary food waste and leftovers. The evening meal was the meagerest and usually consisted of leftovers from lunch or simple cold snacks. The table was set with cheap cheese, yesterday's stale bread, and a pitcher of diluted light ale. The weary workers ate in silence, eager to quickly bring their long and incredibly hard workday to a close. Only on rare holidays would sweet pies or a large apple pudding appear on the table. Such moments became a real event, discussed among the workers for weeks on end with great enthusiasm. The food system was structured to minimize the estate owner's expenses for maintaining the staff as much as possible. Food was always purchased in bulk, with preference given to the most inexpensive local varieties of vegetables and grains. Seasonality played a key role. In winter, the diet became particularly monotonous, dull, and lacking in vibrant flavors. Pickles and root vegetables formed the basis of the winter menu, completely replacing fresh produce that was unavailable at that time. It was only in the spring that the first fresh greens, harvested from the far reaches of the large manor garden, appeared on plates. The quality of the food often depended on the housekeeper's personal qualities and her attitude toward her numerous subordinates. A strict and stingy housekeeper might cut daily rations down to the absolute minimum to save the household's funds. A more generous woman might occasionally turn a blind eye to minor infractions and allow the cook to prepare more substantial meals. However, the general basic rules remained unchanged in all large, wealthy households of the 19th century. Food always remained the clearest indicator of a person's status within the closed system of a large estate. This culinary injustice was perceived as an absolute norm, not subject to any doubt or open discussion. Every member of the staff knew their place and was content with the portion allotted to them by the household regulations. I'd be very interested to hear your perspective on such a strict distribution of food in large households. What do you think about this kind of food hierarchy and the strict rules of total frugality when it comes to the workers' meals? Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new videos. A secret passed down from generation to generation lies in the strict seating arrangement at the servants' communal table. The servants' quarters were a world of their own, with unspoken laws and strict rules of unconditional obedience. The head butler always sat at the head of the long oak table, embodying the highest authority on the lower floors. To his right sat the housekeeper, the second most important person in this domestic hierarchy. Seats were then assigned strictly in descending order of rank, experience, and level of influence within the staff. The master's valet and the mistress's personal maid occupied places of great honor in the upper half of the long table. They had the exclusive right to engage in conversation with senior staff and discuss news from the upper floors. Below them sat the senior footman, followed by the mid-ranking maids, coachmen, and numerous household assistants. At the very far end of the table huddled the junior dishwashers, stokers, and unskilled laborers of the spacious kitchen quarters. They were forbidden to speak during meals. Their main task was to silently consume their food and listen to their superiors. The cook held a very special position in this food chain, despite her mid-level status. She had complete control over the preparation of all the food and could secretly enhance the meals of her personal favorites. A thick meat sauce or an extra slice of sweet pie often went to those who diligently assisted her in her work. At the same time, the cook herself rarely sat down at the communal table, preferring to eat right in the kitchen during short breaks. Her work required her constant, uninterrupted presence at the hot stove to monitor the dishes being prepared. On days of large receptions upstairs, the usual tension among the staff rose to its absolute limit. Lunch breaks were drastically shortened. Meals were wolfed down on the go, standing at long wooden kitchen tables. During such hectic moments, the hierarchy temporarily dissolved, giving way to the common goal of ensuring the banquet's success. Senior footmen worked side by side with dishwashers to ensure the smooth and rapid serving of dishes. Only late at night, after all the guests had left, could the staff gather around the table for a full, hearty meal. Food became the most effective tool for control and reward in this society, isolated from the outside world. But do you know exactly what happened to those exquisite dishes left over from the master's feasts? Would you like to learn how the leftovers economy took shape and who had the right to take the best from the master's table? Are you ready for the shocking truth about where the exquisite, expensive delicacies from the master's table disappeared to? On vast estates, there existed an entire shadow economy built around untouched portions of high-quality food. Not a single piece of roasted meat or half a sweet pudding was ever thrown into an ordinary trash can. All these delicate leftovers were carefully sorted by the cook and the head footman immediately after they were brought back downstairs. This process resembled a strict, meticulous inspection more than the usual mundane task of clearing away dirty dishes. The first right of choice always remained unconditionally with the head of the kitchen and the senior manager. The butler personally inspected the remaining pieces of expensive, rare cheeses and the opened bottles of elite imported wine. These trophies were carefully transferred to his private, lockable sideboard for evening consumption among a select few. The housekeeper would take the untouched pastries, the finest fruits, and the leftovers of expensive desserts made with thick whipped cream. In this way, the most exquisite leftovers never left the upper echelons of the local domestic hierarchy. In some households, there was a strict rule forbidding servants from eating dishes prepared specifically for their masters. Even if a completely untouched cake was returned to the kitchen, ordinary maids were not allowed to even taste it. Fine breadcrumbs and crust trimmings also had their own complex fate in this economy of leftovers. They were dried in a large cooling oven, ground into a fine powder, and stored in large, airtight tin cans. Later, this dry mixture was used to bread croquettes or to thicken sauces that were too runny. Not a single crumb of expensive white flour, which cost a considerable amount of money, was to be wasted. Thrift was the most important skill required of any woman working in a Victorian kitchen. Interestingly, during major holidays, the amount of leftovers increased several-fold. Mechanical refrigerators did not exist, and excess perishable food had to be disposed of very quickly. On such rare occasions, the junior staff might get very lucky, and bits of delicacies would appear on their table. Of course, this was always presented as the greatest kindness and incredible generosity on the part of the household's management. Such moments of culinary indulgence were remembered for a long time and served as an excellent topic for lengthy evening discussions. The system for repurposing leftovers was a true culinary art, requiring knowledge and years of experience. The cook had to know exactly how to mask the taste of yesterday's food with fresh, inexpensive spices. This process of creating hearty, hot meals from leftovers was the hidden foundation of the vast estate's prosperity. I hope you found it very interesting to learn about these hidden culinary secrets of the 19th century. Please like this video to support the release of new historical investigations on our channel. What I'm about to show you is prohibited in 12 countries under strict modern labor laws. The highest echelon of domestic servants enjoyed incredible privileges that were inaccessible to the rest of the household's inhabitants. As mentioned earlier, the housekeeper and the butler had the unquestionable right to dine separately in their own quarters. Their daily diet was strikingly different from the watery soups and tough meat served to ordinary maids. They regularly received the finest cuts of select beef, fresh butter, and white bread of the highest quality. The menu for senior staff often included elaborate dishes specially prepared by the cook just for them. These might include incredibly juicy cutlets, tender baked fish, or intricate pâtés made from expensive liver. The meat was always served with fresh seasonal vegetables, neatly sliced and seasoned with rich sauces. Potatoes for their table were prepared entirely separately, baked until golden brown with the addition of spices. The quality of their food was a notch below that of the masters, but infinitely far from the diet of ordinary manual laborers. A special sign of unquestioned status was the presence of alcoholic beverages during the senior management's lunch. The butler had direct access to the wine cellar and could set aside a bottle of fine wine for his own meal. The tableware in the housekeeper's private room also stood out for its elegance and unusual delicacy of craftsmanship. They used beautiful porcelain plates with delicate patterns, often from the owner's own old dinner services. The silverware was meticulously polished by young, nimble footmen before each meal was served in this room. The table was covered with an immaculately white linen tablecloth made of high-quality linen, which was washed and changed several times a week. The entire setting emphasized their exceptional, privileged status and their proximity to the master's standard of living. Tea time in the housekeeper's cozy room was a very important daily ritual that took place in the afternoon. Genuine Indian or Ceylon tea, which was quite expensive in those days, was served on a beautiful tray. Senior servants had the unique privilege of ordering certain favorite items from suppliers at the estate's expense. If the housekeeper was particularly fond of a certain type of cheese, it would invariably appear on the weekly shopping list. The butler could confidently arrange for the delivery of special varieties of expensive tobacco or spices for his own table. These small gastronomic liberties were viewed by the owners as a necessary reward for complete loyalty and honest work. The difference in daily rations between senior and junior staff was a vast chasm that could not be bridged. For many weary dishwashers, the position of housekeeper seemed like an unattainable dream of a well-fed and very comfortable life. The daily sight of luxurious, fragrant dishes being carried into that room served as an excellent motivator for hard work. This strict food system functioned flawlessly throughout many decades of the 19th century. But what exactly was on the plates of those at the very bottom of this food pyramid? Life at the very bottom of the kitchen hierarchy was completely devoid of even the slightest culinary indulgence. The young women, who spent their days washing enormous pots and peeling endless mountains of root vegetables, ate an extremely monotonous diet. Their hard day began with a serving of watery, bland oatmeal, to which milk was rarely added. Instead of sugar, this morning porridge was sometimes sweetened with cheap molasses, which had a very distinctive bitter aftertaste. The bread they were given daily was grey in colour, baked from the cheapest coarse ground flour. An interesting detail of this diet was the so-called cheese ration, which was consistently distributed once a week. Each maid was allotted a small block of hard, often severely dried out cheese of the lowest, cheapest grade. They saved this cheese, cutting off tiny, translucent pieces from it to add flavour to the bland grey bread. The meal schedule for those who performed the dirtiest work every day was extremely irregular and inconvenient. Dishwashers often had no opportunity to sit down quietly at the table with the other senior servants. They had to eat standing at the stone sink or on the go, quickly chewing down the cold leftovers from the recent lunch. Their short breaks depended on how busy the kitchen was and the amount of dirty dishes constantly coming down from above. On days with large receptions, they might go without a proper hot meal from early morning until late at night. The storage conditions for their personal rations, such as tea or sugar, were quite modest and strict. Each maid had a small tin box where she carefully stored her very modest supplies. These boxes were kept in communal cupboards at all times and often became the subject of minor disputes due to mix-ups or missing items. The housekeeper strictly enforced a rule that no perishable food was to be kept in the servants' bedrooms. Violating this important rule resulted in the immediate loss of all food privileges for an entire long month. Milk was considered a highly valuable commodity and was used primarily for preparing the finest dishes. Junior staff were regularly given only skim milk. The liquid remaining after the cream had been carefully skimmed off. Despite the obvious extreme meagerness of their rations, working on the vast estate guaranteed a steady supply of food. Unlike poor urban factory workers, the servants never went absolutely hungry and always had a roof over their heads. The guarantee of a bowl of hot porridge and a piece of bread every day was very appealing to many young women from the villages. For the sake of this security for the future, they were willing to silently endure hard labor and the strictest restrictions. A full stomach, even if filled with the simplest of foods, was the greatest value in the harsh Victorian world. Guess what happened next when the popularity of exotic beverages skyrocketed during the Victorian era? Tea and sugar instantly became the main points of contention in the relationship between the estate's strict management and the rank-and-file servants. In the early 19th century, these imported goods cost a fortune and were kept under the most secure locks. The distribution of tea became a strict weekly ritual conducted personally by the head housekeeper in her office. Each worker was carefully given a tiny paper packet, the contents of which were supposed to last 7 days. Sugar rations were also strictly regulated and amounted to about ½ pound per person per week. This sugar was usually coarse, unrefined, dark-colored granules, with a distinct sweet caramel aroma. Snow-white cubes of expensive refined sugar were reserved exclusively for the porcelain cups in the luxurious master's parlour. Maids added their dark sugar not only to hot drinks, but also sprinkled a little on their plain morning oatmeal. The ability to stretch this sweet ration to last the entire week was considered the chief sign of thrift and discipline. The leftover tea leaves from the master's porcelain teapots were never thrown away immediately after a tea party. The moist, high-quality leaves were carefully collected and dried on warm metal trays next to the kitchen stove. This dried byproduct was sometimes given to the younger female servants as a small additional incentive. Although the flavor of such a brew was barely detectable, it was still in high demand among the dishwashers. Nothing was to go to waste in the complex mechanism of total economy on a vast, wealthy estate. The locks on the tea cabinets were always very sturdy, and the housekeeper constantly carried the keys to them on her belt. There are historical accounts of maids being sent to the local jail for stealing a handful of granulated sugar. Interestingly, during large feasts, the consumption of tea and sugar was also strictly controlled. Despite the general hustle and bustle in the kitchen, the housekeeper personally and meticulously measured out the ingredients for elaborate desserts. She made sure the cook did not exceed the allotted amounts, using the grand scale of the banquet as an excuse. Strict food records were kept in special thick notebooks, noting the exact weight of every ingredient used. At the end of each month, these records were personally reviewed by the master of the house or his chief financial officer. These simple foods, which today are found on every table, were back then true markers of social status. Access to a high-quality sweet drink divided people into those who silently served it and those who leisurely consumed it. Strict weekly rations reminded every servant of their humble place in the vast household hierarchy. But do you know what incredible dishes were created from those very expensive ingredients for the upper floors? Are you ready to discover just how complex and extravagant the menu of Victorian aristocrats was? The dinners of wealthy aristocrats were elaborate culinary spectacles consisting of multiple courses. A classic formal dinner consisted of at least 7 consecutive courses, served in a very strict order. The long meal began with thick, crystal-clear soups and exquisite broths, beautifully garnished with herbs. This was followed by fish dishes, such as salmon in a creamy sauce or elaborate baked fish terrines. Each new course required completely clean plates and a change of silverware for all guests. Elaborate meat rolls were served separately, marking the next significant course in this endless culinary marathon. Special delicacies were stuffed with complex fillings of boiled chestnuts, white breadcrumbs, and high-quality bacon. Meat products were often sourced from the vast estate's own lands, which strongly underscored the owner's status. These dishes were artfully arranged to maximize their visual appeal and grandeur on the table. Experienced footmen in white gloves carefully circulated among the guests, offering the finest cuts from heavy silver trays. Vegetables on the manor's menu were never served as coarse peasant stews or shapeless, watery purees. Every boiled carrot was trimmed to a perfect shape, and potatoes were always served as uniform, neat balls. Expensive asparagus, artichokes, and greenhouse cucumbers appeared on the master's table regardless of the season. The availability of fresh vegetables during the frosty winter demonstrated the host's wealth and the fact that he possessed enormous heated greenhouses. A large staff of gardeners was hired to cultivate these finicky crops, working tirelessly from dawn to dusk. The temperature at which dishes were served was absolutely critical to the success of a perfect dinner. Porcelain plates were heated thoroughly in special metal cabinets so that the food would not grow cold in the long, cold corridors. The footmen had to run quickly through the underground passageways, carrying heavy trays with scalding hot dishes. The slightest delay risked the sauce forming an unpleasant film, and the meat would quickly lose its appeal. The speed and incredible precision of the service were honed during daily, rigorous rehearsals under the butler's supervision. Setting the dining table required immense attention to detail and took several hours of painstaking work. The placement of heavy candelabras, fresh floral arrangements, and crystal glasses was calibrated to the millimeter. Each invited guest had before them a perfectly symmetrical arrangement of cutlery for all 7 planned courses. Starched napkins were folded into very intricate shapes, white swans, lotuses, or architectural elements. The beauty of the table was meant to fully match the splendor of the exquisite and very expensive food served on it. This daily feast of gluttony stood in stark contrast to what was happening beneath the floor of the luxurious dining room. While delicacies in truffle sauce were being savored upstairs, downstairs people were silently finishing their cold, watery porridge. 2 completely different realities existed side by side, separated by only a few dozen wooden steps. These grand feasts required colossal financial resources, a significant portion of which was inevitably wasted. A vast amount of high-quality food remained completely untouched at the very end of these long evenings. The scale of the regular food waste following lavish aristocratic receptions was truly staggering. Strict rules of etiquette dictated that far more food be prepared than all the invited guests could physically consume. A lavishly set table symbolized the estate owner's immense wealth, boundless generosity, and unshakable status. Half-empty dishes were considered a terrible disgrace for the hosts, so the kitchen always prepared food in enormous quantities. As a result, kilograms of top-quality meat and expensive side dishes were returned downstairs almost completely untouched. Some dishes were created by chefs solely for visual effect and were not intended to be eaten at all. The highly intricate butter sculptures that adorned the table would lose their shape after dinner and be ruthlessly thrown away. Tall towers of burnt caramel and powdered sugar served merely as decorations for more practical, delicious desserts. Creating them required dozens of hours of painstaking labor by a weary pastry chef, yet their lifespan was extremely short. After each banquet concluded, these fragile works of culinary art were sent to the general waste bin. Fruit from heated greenhouses represented a separate, major category of wasteful resource use. Juicy grapes and peaches had to look absolutely perfect, without the slightest blemish or dent on their delicate skin. Fruit, with even the slightest imperfections, was rejected at the very beginning of the sorting process and was not allowed into the formal dining room. At best, they were used to make sweet jams. At worst, they simply rotted in the farthest corners of the pantries. The desire to present only perfect produce to guests always led to colossal losses of the harvested crop. Interestingly, open bottles of expensive collectible wine were also extremely rarely kept until the next large-scale reception. It was believed that good wine quickly loses its bouquet if a bottle remains open for even one extra day. The leftover wine was poured into special oak barrels for making culinary sauces and meat marinades. However, the amount of this leftover wine often exceeded the kitchen's needs, and large surpluses might simply be poured out. The butler took the utmost care to ensure that junior staff had no access whatsoever to these wine leftovers. The owners of vast estates rarely gave a thought to the fate of what remained on the porcelain plates after their meals. For them, the very act of dining was an important social ritual in which delicious food served as a luxurious backdrop. Paying astronomical bills from numerous food suppliers was viewed as an inevitable burden of aristocratic life. Financial managers would sometimes timidly attempt to point out excessive spending, but their advice was almost always ignored. The status and reputation of an impeccably hospitable host were valued far more highly than the pounds sterling saved. This stark contrast between luxury at the top and frugality at the bottom shaped the unique atmosphere of that era. Maids, carrying heavy trays full of untouched food, would silently return to their simple bowls of porridge. Over time, these centuries-old traditions of extravagant feasts began to fade away very gradually. The economic crises of the late 19th century forced even the wealthiest families to re-evaluate their kitchen expenses. Festive menus became much shorter, and the approach to purchasing provisions became more rational and prudent. However, during its heyday, this culinary excess knew absolutely no reasonable limits, and the main symbol of this gastronomic madness always remained the reverent and complex attitude toward meat. In Victorian society, attitudes toward meat products were distinctly and strictly class-based. The quantity and quality of meat consumed on a regular basis unerringly determined a person's social status. The aristocracy always preferred fresh beef, young lamb, and specialty farm products. These types of tender meat were considered noble, easy on the stomach, and suitable for the most refined palates. Pork appeared on aristocratic tables extremely rarely, as it was strongly associated with the peasant and working-class diet. Workers on the lower floors were consistently served a thick, opaque, and very fatty dark brown broth. Cheap pearl barley or a thick flour slurry was often added to it to increase its overall nutritional value. The presence of thick meat juice on the plate was considered the main sign of good quality food in the mess hall. The workers carefully soaked up this dark juice with thick slices of bread, leaving not a single drop behind. The ability to quickly and efficiently scoop up the gravy from the plate was a very important skill, given the limited rations. Often, this bacon-scented sauce was the only meat component of their modest meal. It gave the bland potatoes and boiled turnips the necessary salty flavor and a pleasant, satisfying aroma. The estate owners sincerely believed that a diet rich in meat was extremely harmful to ordinary manual laborers. There was a popular theory that excessive consumption of beef made servants lazy, aggressive, and disobedient. A meager, austere diet of porridge and root vegetables, on the other hand, was considered the key to obedience and diligence in work. This convenient philosophy perfectly justified the strict cost-cutting measures regarding the meals of the vast staff of domestic servants. Medical treatises of the time often openly supported this idea of class-based dietary segregation. A rare exception was made only for those servants who performed the heaviest physical labor outdoors on a daily basis. Woodcutters and manual laborers received slightly larger portions of cheap salted pork or salted meat. It was believed that their hard labor in the open air required additional calories to maintain physical strength. However, the quality of this meat always remained extremely low. Often, these were the most sinewy cuts. They were simmered for a long time with a huge amount of onions in large cast iron pots, set over a low heat early in the morning. The delivery of fresh provisions to the estate was a significant event that slightly disrupted the routine of kitchen life. On such days, small scraps of fresh meat might even find their way onto the tables of the junior kitchen staff. The cook made special dark sausages, which were considered a true rarity among the common folk. Excess fat was rendered for later use in baking and for lighting the long, distant corridors. Not a single part of the fresh produce went to waste. Everything was put to use within the framework of very strict total economy. Interestingly, even on the biggest holidays, the social divide in the meat menu always remained. At Christmas, the gentleman would linger over a huge turkey with chestnuts or some other exquisite delicacy. The staff in the servants' quarters received a large piece of roast beef, which was a rarity but not an exotic treat. This festive beef was tougher and cheaper than the beef served on the upper floors a week earlier. Nevertheless, for the maids and weary footmen, it was a veritable feast they had eagerly awaited all year. The meat served as an excellent visual aid for studying the rigid class structure of 19th century society. A single glance at a person's plate could accurately reveal their background, position, and income. The insurmountable gastronomic boundaries were just as rigid as the social class boundaries of the time. This incredibly complex system functioned solely thanks to the hidden labor of dozens of people. Their daily culinary routine always remained completely invisible to those who enjoyed the results of their work. The kitchen of a Victorian estate was not merely a place for preparing food, but a veritable production factory. Life here scarcely paused for a moment, governed by the strict rhythm of boiling pots and blazing stoves. It was a completely closed-off space where the owners rarely ventured down, and only when accompanied by the housekeeper. It was governed by its own laws, smells and sounds, all of which were incomprehensible to the residents of the elegant, quiet upper floors. The clatter of heavy copper cookware and the sizzle of hot fat created the constant background noise of this underground realm. At the very center of this factory stood a massive cast iron stove that demanded constant, close attention. Maintaining the correct heat across the different sections of the long stove was an art upon which the success of all the dishes depended. The heat from the enormous stove made work in the kitchen unbearably hard, especially during the stifling, sweltering summer months. The kitchen workers constantly suffered from heat-induced skin redness, which they treated with plain rendered fat. The system of spacious pantries consisted of a complex labyrinth of rooms, each with its own strict temperature regime. Root vegetables, hams suspended from the ceiling, and long bunches of onions were stored in cold, completely dry rooms. Fresh milk, butter, and perishable raw meat were carefully kept in cool, damp, cold stores. Separate lockable cabinets were reserved for spices, tea, expensive sugar, and exotic dried fruits. Knowing where and how to properly store each product was the most important skill of a very good cook. The process of washing dishes by hand was a never-ending daily chore for the lowest-ranking maids. There was no hot running water. It had to be constantly heated in large pots right on the stove. Despite the extremely harsh conditions, the professionalism of Victorian kitchen workers commands deep respect. Without precise timers or thermometers, they managed to prepare the most complex dishes to an absolutely perfect degree of doneness. Their innate sense of timing and understanding of culinary processes allowed them to brilliantly organize banquets for hundreds of guests. This invaluable experience was passed down from elders to juniors through many years of practice and endless, tedious repetition. A young woman who began washing floors at the age of 14 could become a highly respected cook by the time she turned 30. Numerous cookbooks of the time often contained advice on managing this complex household operation. Authors strongly advised keeping strict records of all supplies and monitoring the consumption of firewood and coal on a daily basis. Thrift was elevated to an absolute virtue, while the servants' wastefulness was described as the chief enemy of the household's well-being. These printed guides established management standards that were strictly adhered to in most estates. The paperwork in a large, busy kitchen could easily rival that of the accounting department of a medium-sized trading company. Today, many spacious Victorian kitchens have become quiet museum exhibits, cold and lifeless. Heavy copper pots have been polished to a shine and hang neatly on the walls, completely devoid of soot and heat. Huge cast iron stoves have cooled down for good, no longer requiring a morning stoke or the constant attention of stokers. Only thick, old cookbooks serve as a faint reminder of the scale at which this machine once operated. The memory of these people and their grueling labor is carefully preserved in old food ledgers. The era of lavish, long dinners and strict kitchen hierarchies has left us with many fascinating historical mysteries. The daily lives of servants turned out to be much more complex and interesting than the polished, idealized scenes in popular TV series. Please let us know in the comments which topics from everyday life you'd like to see in our next videos. Perhaps you're interested in the details of wardrobe care or the intricacies of heating massive, cold castles. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so we can continue to uncover new chapters of hidden history together.